Chip Hayward here to present session number 9 on construction, the second part of construction. Go ahead, Chip.
All right. Good afternoon. As Don said, this is the part two of construction for the CDT prep class. We've got about 75 slides. We'll be going through them pretty quickly. If you have questions, go ahead and submit them, and then at the end of the session, then we'll address those questions. So just so we can keep moving. This is approximately 8% of the CDT exam. Again, a lot of these questions may be in the form of contract responsibilities or reference A201 general conditions. This is an AIA approved class. You can see where we are in the life cycle graphic. We're in the construction phase, and these are the learning objectives that we're going to be talking about today. We're going to cover the quality assurance and quality control activities during construction, payment procedures, final completion and final payment, contract termination and suspension, and the claims process, and bid and performance and payment bonds. So those are the main topics that we're going to be talking about. We have talked or presented about quality assurance and quality control in the past. We're going to go into it a little more in depth, in particular related to the construction phase. This is a session outline. Contract time. As we all know, time is money. This is absolutely true in the construction industry. Contracts have procedures for measuring and determining the time of construction and use the metric of calendar days as opposed to work days or Monday through Friday. That's very important for you to understand, and particularly when you're evaluating construction schedule. A contractor schedule might be, developed using work days, and it'll have to be correlated to, calendar days if you're evaluating some kind of time extension. Contract time begins with the notice to proceed and ends with substantial completion. That's a very important concept for you to understand. And substantial completion may not be the actual point at which the project ends. There may be punch list work that needs to be accomplished or achieved after that time. So the project end date may actually occur after all the punch work is done, but contractually substantial completion is when liquidated damages may be stopped or no longer imposed. We'll cover this in more detail later in the session, but again, when substantial completion has been reached, that's generally when the authority having jurisdiction or the building official has issued a certificate of occupancy, and punch list items are minor, and all of the life safety elements, including alarm detectors and operational systems, are in place, and the building can be occupied by the owner or the general public. Don, you have something you want to add?
Yeah, a comment to that is just to remember when you're talking about calendar days, if you have 365 days to get something completed, that doesn't mean you have 2,080 hours, because that includes all the holidays and the weekends associated extended time period. So when you're trying to do the math on how much time it takes, keep that in mind, that it does exclude holiday time.
Just the important thing to remember on this slide is when the contract time begins and when the contract time ends, and when what are those two dates. All right, quality assurance, quality control, QA, QC in construction is very important, and will ultimately determine if a project is successful and has longevity, or just looks like pretty on day one. Cheap and fast is not the panacea of good building design and construction. A good example is the AMC Gremlin or the Chevy Vega. Some of you may not even have heard of these cars, or the Volkswagen Thing. Don brought up another one, which was the Ford
Pinto.
Ford Pinto today. So, these were all cheap cars. They weren't necessarily high on quality. They were appealing at first, and they looked nice on the showroom, but they tended to fall apart after a few years, and ultimately, many ended up in a car crusher, wiped from history. So, you want to persevere, then make sure that you have good quality in your construction and design. You may recall this quality triangle graphic from session 2. As a reminder, quality is impacted by extent, scope, and time. Consequently, the owner has a tremendous impact on the quality of the project by setting the budget, the time frame, and the extent of the work. It's very important for you to remember that the owner is the one that sets the budget and the time frame and the extent of the work. The owner ultimately controls these things. Quality requirements are established by the contract documents, primarily by the specifications as discussed in a previous session, and there's no need to expand on this further. We all know that the drawings cover basically the quantity and layout of the work, but the specifications deal with the quality of the work. Quality assurance is the process to make sure that the work is executed properly. Submittals and certifications are good examples of QA in the construction phase of the project. Assurance occurs before the work is completed. So that's a good way to remember what the difference between quality assurance and quality control. So again, assurance is similar to insurance is before the work is actually completed. You're assuring that that's going to be successful or proper. Quality control is the process of evaluating completed work. So make sure you understand the difference between quality assurance and quality control. A good way to keep the terms straight is A stands for assurance, sort of like insurance as I mentioned before, and C stands for completed. An example of QC during construction is material testing, such as a concrete strength testing or static water test for window or skylight assemblies. So make sure that you understand that concept. The other concept you need to make sure you are aware of or have a good handle on is this process known as the quality loop or quality spiral. So what that means is that the quality control for one action may be the quality assurance for another. An example of that may be the concrete test results. Verifying strength of a concrete mix design might be the basis or standard for acceptance of that concrete in the future. Some other quality control examples. This is a list of some QC examples in construction. Again, material testing, moisture content testing, or equipment testing are all good examples of quality control during construction. Just be aware of the difference. As we've discussed, the drawings address quantitative requirements, size, area, and shape, and the specifications cover qualitative requirements such as performance criteria and workmanship. Everyone on the project team has an impact on quality, just as in a football game. One player fails to block or run a route properly, then the play fails. We've all seen the receiver that missed the route or didn't follow the route, and the quarterback who threw the pass in the wrong direction. So, and generally that leads to a loss if repeated many times during a game. So it's very important that every participant be active and proactive in this quality assurance and quality control effort. The AE's role is to endeavor to protect the owner's interest in the project through observation, but not through exhaustive inspections. The AE keeps the owner informed of deviations and defects and interprets the contract documents when clarification is needed. The contractor is required to visit the site, be on the site, verify dimensions, supervise the work, anticipate problems before they might occur, and coordinate and schedule the work. So I want to underline or emphasize that the contractor is required to verify dimensions. For example, the GC cannot schedule the painter to show up the day after the block's been placed and expect the painting to begin on the block that's heavily laden with moisture and hadn't had an opportunity to cure. So that's an example of where the contractor is responsible for coordinating the work. GC is also required to review and prepare submittals for the AE's review. A very important process to ensure the success of the project.
Not just stamp them.
That's right. Not just rubber stamp them and pass them along. And I'd like to add that the shop drawings really are primarily a benefit to the contractor, not necessarily, to the architect. They're primarily serve the contractor to make sure that there's an understanding that this is what the project's going to be, or what the requirements of the project are going to be. Contractors' QC activities involve supervision and assuming responsibility for means and methods. So as architects or engineers, we often have to kind of step back and make sure that we let the contractor do their job. We don't want to dictate means and methods, particularly in our contract documents. I guess, if I could sing that song, Money, 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 this would be appropriate here for this, but I can't sing, so we're just going to have to kind of wade through this. All right. The general conditions establish the procedures for processing payments. These procedures may be expanded upon in the Division 1 sections. Often the general procedure is the contractor may prepare a pencil copy of the pay application or a draft copy of the pay application, and then the GC and the AE will walk through the job, review the pay application together, and kind of come to an understanding on what the percent complete for each line item in that pay application. Then the GC is going to revise the pay application and may send 6 or 7 copies of the revised pay application to the AE for signature and approve, and then the pay application is sent on to the owner for payment. The number of copies may vary depending on how these submittals are handled and what's ultimately required by the owner as far as the number of originals. But as the architect or engineer of record, you're going to want to at least have 1 original records for your files, and the owner is going to need 1, and certainly the contractor is going to need 1. So at a minimum, there should be 3, and with today's technology and electronics, we often scan and send those back and forth. So just make sure you're clear on the Division 1 requirements on what you're going to insist on being submitted for pay applications.
And keep in mind that based upon the funding mechanisms, there could be several entities who want to see the pay applications every month. So it may be more than 6 or 7 copies.
Yeah. So double checking the math is very important. One mistake in the process, and you're going to have to start all over. So it's a good idea to do a quick math check and make sure that all the values and the line items at least add up. The contract stipulates that the owner must pay the application within a certain time as stipulated in the A201. So that may require that the owner process this payment within 30 days of receipt.
Often much less time.
Sometimes less. Once paid, the owner has fulfilled their contractual obligations for payment, but this does not constitute an acceptance of the work. Very important concept to understand. The GC is still obligated to comply with the contract document requirements, and if a defect is subsequently found, it might be a reason to reject the work and reduce the payment on the next application and deduct the cost for these repairs or rework. A good example might be a 28-day concrete strength test for cylinders that are not coming up to the specified strength, and so then there might be an adjustment made on the next draw if that strength isn't there and corrective action is needed. If payment is delayed or not made, then the owner may be in breach of contract and the GC can stop the work. So make sure that's the one of the times that the GC can actually stop the work. If the GC defaults and there's a shortfall in what it costs to complete the work versus what's been approved for payment by the AE, there's a tremendous liability to the AE for this shortfall. So be conscientious of this potential liability. Again, it doesn't need to be malicious or overt when you're withholding payments, but you need to be conscientious of that potential liability. Payment of stored materials is a common activity as part of the pay application approval. This little photograph that's here is not a bonded warehouse by any means. So payment for off-site materials is trickier. Sometimes it's not allowed if at all. Payment for off-site storage is allowed. If payment for storage is allowed, then the material should be stored in a bonded warehouse. So that if they're stolen, lost, or perish in a storm or fire, then that bond will cover that cost of the loss. This process might involve the payment for the AE's time and travel costs to verify, that these stored materials are actually delivered. So be very careful when you are being asked to pay for stored materials. Quantity verification invoices and photographs should be included with the pay application, when the contractor's requesting payment for this. Payments related to completion. Substantial completion is determined by the AE's inspection. This is one of the 2 times that the architect and engineer actually inspect the project. And basically this is going to occur when the project is available for use for its intended purpose, as we've talked about. The substantial completion designation or occupancy by the owner does not constitute acceptance of the work by the owner. There invariably will be some punch list work that needs to be completed, and it's often said that the last 10% of the work is often the hardest to get done. So getting the trades to come back and finish the work and come back and finish punch work is not always a priority for some folks. They're usually moved on to the next project. As we noted in the previous session, the contractor prepares the initial punch list or list of incompleted items and requests an inspection by the AE. If the remaining work is minor in nature, then a certificate of substantial completion is prepared by the architect or engineer, signed by the GC, and then approved by the owner. Prior to final completion, the owner may take beneficial occupancy of a space to allow owner's trades to complete their work. Carpet and furniture are good examples of when that will occur, or when beneficial occupancy might be needed. At substantial completion, the owner takes responsibility for routine maintenance, power and lighting costs, and the start date begins for the GC's correction period and special warranties. So this term correction period is now used in the A201 general conditions, is not referred to as a warranty period any longer. The AE contracts now refer to this correction period, which is outlined in that little yellow box. Sometimes the warranty start date may be delayed depending on the status of the remaining punch list work. When the warranty start date is delayed, this may be, conditional substantial completion or beneficial occupancy date. Although not noted here, substantial completion may also trigger the release of 1/2 of the 10% retainage on a project This reduction may not be across the board, and any reduction is generally at the discretion of the architect and the owner. And we'll talk about this a little bit later. Final completion. Final completion is when all the punch list work is completed and it's verified by the AE's inspection. Again, the second time that the AE actually does an inspection, and all of the closeout documents are submitted. Very important to make sure that we get all these closeout documents. The owner has to pay the contract, and the contractor has to accept final payment before final completion date is set. Very important concept. There's often a final change order that's prepared to address any adjustments in allowances, credits, or adds to the project, or adjustments for liquidated damages. Approval of the final change order, again, is going to be a prerequisite for final payment. By contract, retainage is usually held on all payments made by the owner up to 10% of the value, in addition to the balance of the contract amount that is to be paid. It's not a penalty or to be used to force the contractor to perform. It's a form of insurance to allow the owner sufficient funds to correct the work or settle third-party claims if needed. Portion of the retainage may be released at the 50% completion point in the project if approved by the owner and the AE. So you're just going to have to look at your particular contract requirements and what is spelled out in your general provisions. But for example, if the concrete work has been completed for several months and there's finishes that are still, going on, the retainage on the concrete line item for the pay application might be reduced at the 50% milestone. And that retainage may be dropped from 10% to 5%. That may be triggered by another milestone phase of the project if there are not any, quality issues with that particular work element. Retainage is often reduced at substantial completion, but at the discretion of the owner and the AE, as noted in the previous session. Did you have something you wanted to add? Okay. AE has the right and responsibility to withhold certifying the pay application in whole or part, and not withhold payment, just certification. This list below is, on the next page illustrates some reasons for withholding payment. So just be, familiar with these examples. These are some additional reasons. Note that the failure to keep up record documents and cleaning of the project site are reasons for withholding certification. Liquidated damages are the financial penalty paid by the contractor to the owner for not meeting the substantial completion date or a particular milestone on the project. Liquidated damages might be as much as $500 a day and should be reasonable based on the actual and quantifiable damages that the owner may incur. If they're slanted too much in favor of the owner's enrichment, then they may be disputed, and the only actual damages would be paid. Then the dispute ensues on what is going to be, what is going to be the actual damages. So then you get into a big fight later on. So just make sure that they're reasonable and defendable. Liquidated damages can be a double-edged sword. If the schedule is unreasonable, the damages set too high, then the GC and the bidders are just going to pad their bid to incorporate the cost. These damages are often stipulated in the supplemental general conditions, and there may be a bonus clause for early completion as well as a penalty for failure to perform or meet the deadline. So you can imagine the impact if a school was delayed and was not able to open when it was anticipated to be completed, or a hotel was delayed that had been, accepted reservations in advance of the completion date. So there could be some big variances in liquidated damages that may be charged to a contractor for not completing the project, and it's going to vary by project. As noted previously, there's often a final change order that adjusts the contract value up or down, preferably down. The list below covers some of the more common items that might be adjusted in the final change order. So again, as part of the final payment for the owner should request a final release of all liens. This is very important because if there's a claim from a third party after the GC's been paid in full, the owner may still be on the hook for payment of materials and services on the project. There's a number of historical cases where people have taken over projects and our owners have bought a project and there was no release of lien, and the owner was on the hook for still having to pay for things that they had no involvement on.
It happens quite a lot with the residential contractors.
Subcontractors have a responsibility to protect the work in place, not just their own, when they perform the work that they are contracted for. So this is pretty logical and straightforward. But for example, if the painter spills paint on the carpet or furniture when touching up the door frame as part of a punch list item, then the painter is responsible for the repair and the cleanup. And the same holds true for the carpet installer when he scratches a door or dings a wall base or wooden base or damages some other part of the building. So everybody has to be respectful of the other trade. GC is ultimately responsible for safety on the project, and safety procedures are often covered as part of a weekly safety meeting with the contractors and subcontractors. So the federal OSHA and state regulations govern these safety requirements, but many companies have their own guidelines that may be more stringent. For example, attendance at the weekly job site safety meeting or a test, or all visitors must sign in, may be escorted or must be escorted by the GC, are good examples of some additional safety requirements. Representatives from the AE, subconsultants, and the owners must abide by these contractors' safety regulations. Although the contractor is solely responsible for job site safety and compliance with regulations, if you as an AE witness a violation, then you should follow up with the contractor's superintendent. And be careful what you photograph, as the photo you took might be documenting that you witnessed a safety violation and may become a liability for yourself. So just be conscientious of what you're taking photographs of when you're on the job site.
It's important to know job site safety requirements, even as an architect, if you're out there on the job site, just to be aware of it. And it's important to also make sure that the owners follow.
Yep.
They tend to think that it's their job site, and it's not until the contractor hands it over.
Good point. Just as the drawings and specifications are not always 100% accurate, there will be construction work that's not conforming with the contract documents. So it's a good idea to pick your battles and focus on the major elements. Don't just turn a blind eye, but ask yourself if the repair is going to look worse than a defect, particularly when you are considering adding it to a punch list. If the work is concealed and it's suspect that it's non-compliant with the contract documents, then the AE has the right to request that it be uncovered. However, you better be right. If the work is in compliance, then the owner puts the bill for the demolition, repair, and the delay that this exercise may have caused. So it's a good idea to make sure that you're correct and visit the job site at regular intervals so that you don't run into this issue. Try to anticipate or catch these problems before they get covered up. If there's a unapproved substitution, then this may be a cause for rejection of the work. The owner and only the owner may accept non-conforming work, not the architect. So very important concept for you to understand relative to CDT and A201. And this acceptance should be documented. So if there's something that is found on the job site that's non-compliant with the contract documents, then there should be a written record of that acceptance, or a change order if there's going to be a deduct or change in value. Again, as discussed in the A201 session, the AE cannot stop the work. So you'll see on this slide with the double red plus signs there, that's the very most important thing you need to take away from this slide. Stopping the work has some severe financial implications and ramifications, and requires certain written notices as spelled out in the general conditions of the contract. So if the owner and the contractor both have the ability to stop the work when certain conditions arise. So the contractor can stop the work for non-payment, however, cannot stop the work if hazardous material is uncovered. Only work in that affected area can be stopped. So if you discover hazardous material, during the course of construction, then you have to put the AE and the owner on notice. But that doesn't mean that all of the job site activities stop. There's still other work that can be accomplished during this period. The owner has the added right to stop the work without cause. So a good example of this might be, you have a lender that went belly up or failed to fund the project, and the owner has no other source of funding. And so this is not necessarily caused by the GC's failure to perform, but maybe a reason for stopping the work. So this was a common reason for stopping the work for many projects in the recession that occurred in between 2008 and 2012. So another example is there's a market shift, and maybe Amazon needs a bigger warehouse or a different type of sorting facility that's twice the size currently being constructed, and they need it in the same time frame. So current GC may not be able to meet their deadline or bond the job, so then they may have to stop the work or hire another GC to complete the work or supplement the GC's work. But there's a number of reasons why the owner may want to stop the project, and they do have that contractual ability to do that. The terminator. I'll be back maybe when time travel occurs, right? So, all right, very simply, the owner has the right to suspend the work or terminate the contract. So in addition to stopping the work, the owner has the ability to suspend that work. And there are contractual written notices that must be sent to the contractor by registered mail. And again, there's going to be ramifications and implications that will be incurred if the owner chooses that path. If the work is suspended by the owner for a period of time as stipulated in the contract, and this suspension is through no fault of the contractor, then the contract can be terminated by the contractor, or the contract can stop the work. For example, if the owner suspends the project for 3 months while redesign is completed for the Amazon expansion that we talked about, or alternate funding source is needed to obtain the funding for the project, then the contractor has the right to terminate the contract or renegotiate the terms of the contract. So if there's an Indian burial ground that's found during excavation, or the lost city of Atlantis, or a hurricane cut off all the utilities and access to the site, for example, again, loss of bank funding through default to the bank, then the work may need to be suspended for a period of time. It's important to note that overhead, material, and labor costs can increase substantially, or there may be remobilization costs that are going to be have to be accommodated. So if the owner fails to make payments timely, then the contractor can also terminate the contract. So these are all good examples of when the contractor can terminate the contract. These are some examples of termination for cause by the owner. Again, I would encourage you to never threaten to terminate the contract unless the owner is fully prepared to pursue this action. So it's pretty risky to be throwing those knives around. The owner may suspend the work for convenience. Let's say, for example, you're building a high-rise in downtown Tampa, and the geotechnical engineers completed a full assessment of the site, drilling many test borings. But then the pilot drill rig that's drilled 100 of the 200 pilot borings for the caissons, and they start finding anomalies in the project. So these pilot borings often are driven further than what may have been done as part of the initial excavation, but the owner may suspend the work till the geotechnical engineer has an opportunity to reassess the foundation and design along with the structural engineer, and it may require updated pricing before abandoning or moving forward with the project. So that's an actual case that happened in downtown Tampa. The contractor is delayed in this scenario, then the contractor would be entitled to an extension of time and may be entitled to remobilization or acceleration costs when the work is resumed, plus the cost of any adjustment for the added work. So if the owner decides to suspend the work, we just need to be aware that there could be added costs that occur that are more than just the time. Example given in the last slide, if the geotech determines that the foundation design will require a mat foundation, and this adds $2 million to the contract price, the owner may elect to terminate the project for convenience and resume the project when maybe concrete prices aren't so high. So if this occurs, the contractor must be provided with a written directive and must stop work immediately and take measures to protect the work in place. Very important to remember that the contractor may be entitled to compensation for overhead and profit, as well as lease costs, demobilization costs for equipment, or job site trailers that are rented for extended periods of time. So just because the work stops doesn't mean that the spigot of money will stop.
It's turned off.
These are some light item costs that the contractor might be entitled to be paid for upon termination. Certainly work executed and in place, reasonable overhead and profit, as I mentioned before, cost incurred for reason of termination, and also potential damages that the contractor may be incurred as a result of this termination. Claims and disputes. Projects are successful when they're completed on time, budget, and all the claims are resolved. The project team has achieved the owner's goals and expectations. That's a good sign that you've completed the project successfully. The contractor submits an RFI. In contrary with the AE's interpretations and response, believes that there are added time or money or both to the project, then the contractor has the right to submit a claim. And if the claim lingers and not resolved timely, then it may become a dispute. So what we're trying to point out here is that a claim is an unresolved dispute. That's going to be the definition of that. Again, all parties should try to work to resolve the dispute fairly, because invariably the attorneys are the only ones that went out.
And quickly.
Yeah.
Because some claims turn around and manifest onto other claims.
Whenever there's an opportunity for interpretation due to lack of clarity, completeness, or coordination, or completeness, then there's a risk for a claim to be submitted, as we mentioned earlier. So some examples of possible claims due to change conditions are listed here. Some might not be due to drawing errors. There might be justification for a claim due to unforeseen conditions, maybe hidden mold or hazardous material behind maybe a built-in seating unit, or hidden or buried telecommunication lines, or an abandoned water line that's not shown on the survey. But oftentimes you're going to have claims for extended overhead, and documentation of the contractor's concurrent delays are going to be critical to keep track of to help mitigate this. This is why the submittal schedule we talked about in the previous session is so critical. So contractors making a claim that the AE is not turning the shop drawings around timely, what's the basis for that claim? You're going to have a shop drawing or submittal schedule to be able to say, yeah, okay, he was actually delayed or not delayed, and that's why that's so important as AEs for us to insist that the contractor provide that. When a claim is submitted, proper documentation needs to be submitted with that claim to support the claim. This might include climatological data if there's a claim for rain delays or other supporting information, as well as a detailed cost estimate for the net difference in cost. Again, claims do not have to originate with the contractor. They may originate from a supplier or a subcontractor. They need to be submitted in writing, and they must be submitted timely. That's important for you to look back at what the contracts state. Generally, there's a time frame of when those claims have to be submitted. The owner might have the basis for a claim, and these are some scenarios when that might occur. Belief that the value of work received is not commensurate with the contract sum. Increased costs because actions or inactions by the contractor. So if you have liquidated damages, that's probably a good example of a claim that the owner may have. The key here is to recognize that claim process is not one-sided. The owner has the ability to withhold payment or a portion of the payment until a claim is resolved with the contractor. These are some examples of when this might occur. The last item, ineffective management, is a good one. For example, if the contractor is late in ordering custom windows, the contractor, superintendent, project manager quits halfway through the project. He never ordered the windows. By the time the windows arrive, it's 3 months beyond the due date when the project was supposed to be completed and dried in, and the critical path is impacted. So projects are late. The AE incurs extensive cost in reviewing shop drawings, attending meetings that weren't planned, or has to work harder to help meet the project schedule. Then the AE may submit for additional services and request that the owner backcharge the contractor for those. So in another example or scenario, there may be 6 or more punch list visits that are required to establish final completion. And then the AE may request additional compensation for these costs. Oftentimes you'll see that the general conditions or Division 1 specifications will stipulate that the contractor will prepare the punch list. The AE will go out to the job site maybe for 2 site visits, and after that, then the contractor is going to be on the hook for those additional site visits. So you'll see sometimes that's very common in Division 1 specifications. Claims have 2 separate determinations. First, was the information shown on the drawings or in the specifications in the scope reasonably inferred by the documents or the standards referenced? If not, then the contractor is going to be entitled to compensation. If yes, the documents are clear and not subject to misinterpretation, then the contractor again is not entitled to those additional costs. But wait, there's a second litmus test. The second determination is the timing of that claim, as we mentioned before. So the contractor has to submit the claim timely to the owner to mitigate the costs of the claim if possible. If the claim is not submitted on time or within the time limit that's required by the contract, then that claim can be denied. So again, the claims have to be submitted in a time frame allotted that's defined by the contract for construction. The owner has the right to submit a claim under the terms of the contract. However, the claim must be evaluated by the AE using the same objectivity and professionalism and partiality as with the contractor's claim. So as the AE, we have to be kind of the judge, and the jury, and we have to be impartial. The AE general conditions, A201, have now created an entity called the initial decision maker. You'll note that this slide has a double plus sign up there at the top, so make sure that you understand what this term is and who this individual or entity might be. The initial decision maker is there to help resolve claims, and within the A201, by default, is going to be the architect. However, this entity may be a fourth party. It may not necessarily be the architect. So this term I've been around for a few years, but it's relatively new. In the past, the architect has always been the initial decision maker. They just haven't referred to it as that in that term. So,
correct.
But if there's going to be a fourth party, then the initial decision maker has to be identified within the contract and agreed to by all parties, if not the architect engineer. The initial decision maker should be knowledgeable and capable of interpreting the contract documents and have an extensive background in construction administration, and again has to be an impartial party. If justification is apparent from the outset, meaning that there's no way for the contractor could have inferred from the contract documents that something was going to be required, then that claim will need to be approved and settled quickly and timely. Initial decision maker and the architect AE, whoever that individual is, has to respond to the claim within a set time frame. Usually it's going to be 7 to 10 calendar days, and the AE or the initial decision maker has to take one of 5 actions that's outlined in that Article 15.2.2 of the A201. So they can request additional data, reject a claim in whole or part, approve the claim. They can suggest a compromise or notify the parties that there's insufficient information to evaluate the merit of the claim, or if the initial decision maker has a potential conflict of interest. So be familiar with the claims process as part of that Article 15.2.2 and as discussed in the session on A201. Again, all claims have to be backed up with the supporting data and documentation, and if there's not sufficient information, then the AE needs to respond immediately and request that information.
Don't wait your 5 to 7 days and then say you don't have the information.
Yep. If there's ample information to resolve or make a determination about a claim, then the AE should process the claim without favor to the client or the contractor. Need to be beyond and above reproach. As an aside, note that the owner is obligated to pay for first cost. So what does that mean? If a door needs a specific set of hardware to meet code, say a closure, and this wasn't included in the hardware schedule, maybe the wall was rated, but the door wasn't identified as a door, and the door hardware supplier and the GC had no way of knowing the door closure was needed to be provided, then the GC is clearly entitled to a change, as the item needed was not inferable from the document. But the owner may want the AE to pay for that closure. However, this is unreasonable because the owner is responsible for those first costs related to that change. So something that was going to be required to make the door functional and comply with the code, the owner would have paid for that as part of a bid process, regardless of whether it was shown or not. So again, conversely, the AE is not going to be rewarded for any value engineering savings that might have been generated, but the AE may be on the hook for any premium costs associated with a change. So while the first cost may be the owner's responsibility, if there was a delay to the project, then the AE may have incurred some of that cost.
That's often referred to as betterment too.
Yeah. The term dispute avoidance is a better term for resolution of claims. There should be an attempt to create a win-win situation for each party. So understanding the interest of each party is the key to this process. Without some compromise, then the claim may ultimately work its way to becoming a dispute and will only involve more legal costs and attorney's fees that oftentimes exceed the actual cost of the work that's being disputed. Contractor has to recognize that the owner has rights under the contract, and justification of a claim needs to be provided. So if there's additional documentation that needs to be provided, then there should be no dispute or pushback on the contractor to provide that. Contractor should be aware that the owner has the capability to file a claim for poor performance or non-performance by the GC. So remember the old adage, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. When the two parties cannot agree on a compromise or refuse to accept contractual responsibilities, then disputes occur. These disputes can take a lot of time and money and energy to resolve, and oftentimes more money than the actual dispute or the claim that's being presented. It's best to try to keep emotions out of the decision-making process. The AE can help this process by serving as an impartial mediator, even when the AE has some culpability for the required change. So always look for the common ground if you can. Disputes may be inevitable when there are two contractual parties that cannot agree. The owner or the contractor might dig their heels in, with each party being righteous. But historically in the construction industry, there are often few winners in these legal disputes that elevate beyond the roundtable discussion and the negotiation process. So attorneys are, of course, the exception to this rule. So they're the ones that generally are winners in this process. One approach to diffuse the issue is to acknowledge the claim, but hold in abeyance until the end of the project, or hold the claim in abeyance until the end of the project and seek some compromise when clear heads may prevail and emotions are not running high. Often the reason disputes occur is that the parties do not understand or accept the roles and responsibilities that each may be afforded under the contract. The AE may have to counsel an inexperienced owner on the pitfalls of not resolving, a claim amicably
And quickly.
There are procedures and processes for resolving disputes that are spelled out in the general conditions. Each party may demand mediation if this has not been struck from the contract. Process generally follows this format. So the claim's filed. If the claim's not resolved, then the dispute follows. If this dispute elevates beyond, requires some third-party mediator, then that's going to be called mediation. And again, mediation is not successful, then it may go to arbitration with a third-party arbiter. There may be binding or non-binding arbitration. Binding means that it cannot be disputed in a lawsuit and settlement is set. If arbitration is not successful, then it's elevated to a lawsuit and trial by jury. So your jury trial is going to be problematic, as the jury will generally not be familiar with construction processes and procedures, and the trial may be very complex. So each of the processes that have been outlined involve a greater level of legal involvement, depositions, legal experts, expert witnesses, and each is more expensive than the previous step. So you can see from this process that it's best to try to resolve these claims when they're first filed and find some common ground. So that's the steps we're going through. Bonds are an important element of protection for the owner on a construction project. They're not insurance as much as they are assurance. So make sure you understand that bonds are not a form of insurance or an insurance policy. These are the three common types of bonds on a construction project. In this session, we're going to talk about each one of these. As you may recall, the first of these listed is the bid bond. We've already covered that in the procurement session, but we're going to go over a little bit and go over some of the ramifications of this type of bond in a little more detail. The surety is the entity that issues the bond, and the principal, of course, would be the contractor. So if you're going to be taking that CDT test, make sure you understand these terms and that the principal is actually the contractor. Principal is not referring to a form of payment or the basis of a payment. The obligee is the owner for whose the benefit the bond is written. And this can be a little confusing since the term obligee implies that one's obligated to pay for the bond. So just make sure you have a good grasp of these terms. Primary purpose of bonds is a promise of assurance that the contract will perform, or the contractor will perform, or that there's a backup entity that will ensure that the project is completed. Sort of like paying the second string NFL quarterback to stand in the sideline and be prepared to take over the game if the first string quarterback gets sacked or breaks an arm or both legs. So again, the surety bonds are not insurance. Contractor or principal remains liable to perform the contractual work and is obligated to indemnify the surety against the loss. If the contractor can do this, then it almost seems pointless to require a bond. I mean, if they're capable of providing the indemnity to the surety, then they should be able to provide the financial ability to get the project completed. But there's not a guarantee for the owner or the lender, then the bond's going to be required. Purpose of a bid bond is to ensure that the low bidder honors his or her bid and will sign the contract for construction. It commits the bidder to the contract. The requirement for the bid bonds are going to be included in the instruction to bidders, as we've talked about in the procurement section. Bid bond will be stipulated amount or percentage of the contract. The bidder fails to sign the contract, then the bid bond pays the difference between the low bidder and the next highest bidder, plus any damages that the owner may have incurred. Once the contract is signed and performance and payment bonds are received, then the bid bond security is often returned to the bidder. Performance bonds provide assurance that the contractor will complete the work and is provided with the signed contract. It's provided for the full value of the contract. So the performance bond is required oftentimes for public work, but may be waived on private work or at the discretion of the owner. So as an AE, we need to be careful we don't get trapped into advising the owner on whether to require or waive the bond requirements. You can imagine the liability that the AE might take on or incur if the contractor that is recommended is defaults, or we recommend that the owner not require a bond, for a particular contractor, regardless of what their history or track record may be in the industry. There are procedures that generally followed if the contractor defaults on the contract. If the surety takes over, then there most likely will be a new contractor involved, and the surety will most likely drive the completion of the project. They're not necessarily going to be concerned about the owner's wishes, or oftentimes they don't really focus on quality. They're just trying to get the project completed as quickly as they can. So surety has the option of paying out the owner and letting the owner contract with another contractor to finish the project as an option.
Yeah, you're best not to ever have to use the surety as a contractor, because if you thought you've dealt with the lowest low bid contractor, you haven't dealt with them until you dealt with the surety. All they care about is getting the job done per the specs, and that's all they're going to follow, and they're going to do it as fast as possible because they're trying to minimize their risk associated with doing the work. They're not providing insurance. Their responsibility is simply to get the project built.
Similar to the performance bond is a payment bond, and it's going to be, the payment bond is for the materials and subcontracted labor. So you oftentimes see the terms payment and performance bond in the same bond requirement. And again, this is for 100% of the contract value. Payment bond, these bonds are often required on public projects and may be optional for private owners, as we mentioned. Payment bonds will cover claims for payment due to liens or delays for unpaid suppliers. Contractor has a bad credit rating because of a problem on another job, then the supplier will not ship the material unless assured of payment. So this basically, ensures that this is going to be covered. Procedures for resolution of a claim that are the same as performance or bond, as we've talked about before. So this is a review outline, what we've talked about today. So if there's any questions, then we'll be happy to answer those.
We don't have any questions lined up. So, again,
we put them all to sleep, huh?
No. Thank you very much, Chip. Appreciate it. Thank you for sitting in. Next week,
we will be sending out under separate cover some sample questions that we'll be going over in our next session. So if you're interested in taking the CDT exam, then these questions will be invaluable for you to kind of start to understand how you need to prepare for the test.
And next week we'll be closing out our sessions with the life cycle post-construction session taught by Mr. Stribling. And then after that, following week, we'll do a test taker mock exam overview. Thank you very much for your time. We will see you